Throughout American history, in times of crisis, Americans have rushed to serve our country. We see people of all races, colors, religions. We see all ranks and all services contribute to the defense of our country. Whenever freedom or our way of life has been threatened, they have responded. As you walk through our museum, it's not the aircraft that are significant, but the young men and women who flew them in defense of our country. The young people who serviced the aircraft, operated the ships, and manned the guns. They all came together to serve. That, my friends, is the real story told in our museum. Gene Cernan was born in Chicago, Illinois in 1934. He was a member of Naval ROTC. He took his naval commission, then came here to Pensacola for flight training. When he got his wings, he was assigned to fly the A-4 Skyhawk. He was assigned to 2 squadrons thereafter. One of them was VA, which stands for Fixed Wing Attack, VA-26, and then VA-113. During the time that Gene Cernan flew in the Navy, flew the A-4, he accumulated some 5,000 total hours of flight time, 4,800 of which were in jets. But he is far better known for his time in space when it comes to American history. Gene Cernan was chosen to fly in the Gemini program. He was the pilot in Gemini 9. He flew with a gentleman named Tom Stafford, who was an Air Force officer. Now you have to remember, each mission had to have experiments and validations that built on each other. The project that Gene Cernan was responsible for performing in Gemini 9 was to put on a backpack with small jets that allowed him to maneuver independent of the space capsule without the umbilical cord. And this proved to be very, very difficult. What they hadn't anticipated or hadn't fully realized was the difficulty involved. In space, it's weightless. So something on Earth would weigh 200 pounds or 1 pound. In space is the same. And when he went outside of the capsule, he had nothing to hold on to. This took longer and was physically more demanding than anyone had anticipated, which meant that he became heated, which meant that he perspired, and that perspiration condensed inside his spacesuit. So he was exhausted and he couldn't see out the visor except through a very, very small hole, and he was in a race against time to get back into the capsule. Following the Gemini program, the United States entered into the Apollo space program. It was Apollo 11 that took us to the moon and back in 1969. There were several subsequent Apollo missions that went back to the moon, and Gene Cernan was the commander of the lunar module on the last trip to the moon in 1972. On Apollo 17, he went to the moon with an astronaut named Jack Schmitt. Jack Schmitt was a scientist and a geologist. While they were there, on the lunar rover, they accidentally broke a fender. Now this presented a problem because the moon dust was often the same as talcum powder or very, very light. And if the wheels picked this up, it would incapacitate those trying to operate it or completely coat the equipment that they were carrying, so they had to fix it. So what they did is they went here into the lunar module. They got some clips, geology maps, and duct tape, and they made a fender, and it worked. And they were able to do all of the experiments that they were scheduled to do with duct tape and a homemade fender. Gene Cernan retired from the Navy after 20 years of service and went on to a successful career in Coral Petroleum and then his own company, the Cernan Corporation. I remember when Gene Cernan flew in here in his Cessna 421 for one purpose only, and that was to talk to our students in the National Flight Academy. And he pulls out his cell phone and he asks them to hold up their cell phone and tells them that they have more computing power in that cell phone than the entire room of computers that sent him to the moon and back. The story of Gene Cernan will forever be in American history and in naval aviation history. His footprints remain on the moon, but his impact on our hearts and our minds will be forever.
I often tell young folks, always shoot for the moon. What have you got to lose? Because even if you miss, I can promise you, you will land somewhere out there among the stars.